Greetings and welcome back. I have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share about the newest Berserk chapter. If you are coming from my last Berserk video, then you should probably already know how I currently feel about what's happened here in Elfhelm since the new chapter started coming out. But if you don't, I recommend watching that video first before this one. Overall, this chapter didn't really change anything for me in that regard. In fact, if anything, I'd say that it strengthened my beliefs, but I'm not here to crucify this chapter or talk about it in a whole lot of depth. I consider 369 to be a victim of the previous chapters in the inevitable fallout of the choices made here by Mori and company, which should telegraph to a degree that I wasn't the biggest fan of the chapter, but I'd like to give credit where credit is due. I think there are sections of this chapter where it's a little bit rough on the art, but the imagery of Guts and his sword at the end is some really good shit. If things had been different, these could have easily been one of the most iconic images in all of Berserk, I think. But doubling back on the art, I'm beginning to have the suspicion that maybe the assistants are pushing themselves a little too far with the deadlines, and not giving themselves enough time. I wouldn't be surprised if the assistants are cutting some corners just to get the chapters out in a timely fashion, and I don't think it's something that's necessary. We, the fans, don't need monthly chapters. We were already used to Miura taking a long time to release content, and I'm sure no one would have any complaints if the assistants took a little extra time to practice and get better until they're actually able to confidently hit that monthly chapter schedule release. These corners being cut may also be the reason why some of these chapters feel very oddly paced and feel more like half chapters. I'm not sure if any of you have noticed that as well. Pacing is a pretty important aspect to writing, and I think if they just give themselves a little more time, it will help them out a lot in the long run. I'm not going to kill them on it because obviously they have a lot of time to improve, but it is something that I noticed. Maybe they've noticed it as well. When it comes to the chapter itself, though, there are a couple of aspects of it that didn't work too well for me. The first of which being Guts. The futile nature of how Guts is feeling here isn't written the best because there's a disconnect between intent and reality. The intended effect is that Guts as a character is meant to exhibit hopelessness and a sense of loss because he's powerless. But the reality is that me, the reader, is unable to emotionally buy into this feeling and connect to the writing because 1, I know that Guts didn't give it his best, and 2, because of how poorly the Griffith and Guts confrontation went. And this goes back to what I was talking about in my last video regarding the Beast of Darkness. Guts never ended up using the Berserker armor in a situation that required him to do so. And I don't think from a writing standpoint you can properly relay a feeling of hopelessness if your protagonist doesn't go all out. And the context of this chapter makes me more sure than ever that this moment here was indeed meant to be Guts' ultimate defeat, which I talked about in my last video. And that makes me more sad about how things went. So it should kind of make sense how this added fuel to the fire for me instead of stemming it. The second element I wanted to talk about is the disappearance of Isma and the consequence of what's happened to Elfhelm. The reason why the Isma and Elfhelm stuff doesn't work too well is because of how things happened. It came across as anticlimactic for me. The main gear for everything happening here was supposed to be Guts and Griffith, right? And beating a dead horse, if the drama leading up to the end isn't that good and the characters who are most affected by it aren't involved that much, characters like Danan and Isma, then logically speaking, it's hard for the story to deliver on that moment if there's not more writing to back it up. What you're left with is more empty feelings, which is certainly what I felt here. I think this chapter was pretty hollow, for lack of a better word. It didn't have that bite to it. Part of this is on Miura, actually, and not the assistants or Mori or anything, at least when it comes to Isma. I think it's fair to say that Miura did not do a good job with Isma as a character, so her disappearing here in front of Isidro isn't meaningful. I don't know how you guys feel, but I certainly don't really care about Isma. I don't dislike her, but I just don't care, and I never did. I consider her to be a lost opportunity and a casualty from the Sea God arc, which is a portion of the story where I think Miura was at a loss and didn't really know what he wanted to do before he got to Elfhelm, and that resulted in what I think is the weakest section in Berserk. As far as Isidro goes, well, he hasn't really had much happen to him since the Bonebeard and Shirka stuff in Falcon, before Bonebeard became ass. So conceptually, I do think it is hard to be invested in Izma disappearing in front of Isidro, because these two characters don't have a whole lot of good groundwork for each other. It's kind of more of like a meme, lighthearted stuff. So it's not completely emotionally impactful. But that doesn't mean that this moment and idea couldn't have worked better, and it also doesn't mean that something worthwhile still can't come from it in the larger scheme of things. If Izma and everyone was supposed to disappear here, I would argue that there needed to be more drama around the situation and with these characters so that it could deliver on its intent. And in retrospect, having random blobs come out of the ground and destroy the island might have been the wrong choice for the storytelling of how Elfhelm was to be destroyed. I don't know how many people watching here have been involved in the Berserk community for any period of time, but if you haven't, I'll share a headcanon that a lot of us had when it came to Elfhelm. Most Berserk fans knew that this arc's ending was going to be a crazy one, because we knew for a fact that Guts and Griffith were going to face one another again, and it was going to be huge. We also knew that the World Tree was around, so the possibility of people being transported from one place to another was a really simple idea to get around. So the idea that a lot of us had was that a war was going to break out on Elfhelm between Griffith, all of his apostles, the demons and everything, versus the people of Elfhelm. And Elfhelm would ultimately be destroyed in the process. This was a very common headcanon. And even though that idea is now wrong, I think it had the right attitude. As an idea, I think it even works better at creating drama and what this arc was going for than the decision to have a bunch of blobs come out of the ground and destroy the island in like 5 seconds. Having a confrontation creates the opportunity for fights and interactions. Izma could have had a moment with Isidro during this war so that when Izma disappears at the end, it matters a bit more instead of just kind of having it happen out of the blue. And Danan, as a character, could have been more relevant in the defense and defeat of her island. And additionally, I think the island being destroyed and a better drama around it would have greatly benefited Skull Knight as well. As you guys know, I'm kind of disappointed in Skull Knight in this situation, and I remembered that Skull Knight's lover and seemingly Danan's sister is buried here beneath the tree. So the destruction of the tree and potentially her grave could have been something with Skull Knight. It opens the door for Zod stuff, and hell, maybe even Void things to be brought up as well. The point here is that what I'm saying is, the island's destruction and the disappearance of his people being dramatic is important to the feeling of hopelessness and defeat that this arc was supposed to embody at the end here with Guts. And the way that things developed, especially the destruction of the tree and the disappearance of Danan and the creatures, isn't very dramatic in a fulfilling way to me because the characters weren't that involved. But that's basically my 2 cents on the chapter. We'll see where everything goes from here. I'm interested to see if anything changes in the way that Mori and company handle things moving into a new arc. There's a possibility that things will be different in a good way, in a new setting. Unlike before where they kind of had to jump in at the end, they'll now be in the position of the driver's seat from the very beginning, and maybe that makes all of the difference. Time will tell, of course, but that's all I can really say. The ball's in their court. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and something that I noticed at the end of the chapter, is the note from the editors, and it's a big deal to me. So we see that the editors, the assistants, everyone put a comment asking for feedback and for it to be sent to their editorial department. I don't know if this has ever been done before. I don't recall ever seeing this in any Berserk chapter in the past, but it could also be the case that I never paid attention to it until now. The fact that they are asking for feedback means that they want to see what other people think, right? And this means that they could be affected by fan opinions and take feedback into consideration when moving into the future. I would love to be able to send some feedback. I'm going to be looking into the viability of internationally sending a letter to them, but the idea seems like a pretty shit one. I would assume a letter in their native language is something the editorial department would be more enticed to read. I'm very skeptical of them being bilingual in English to a competent degree. So on the off chance that there are any native Japanese fans watching this that know English, or if you happen to live in Japan, I would be very, very interested in having my letter translated into Japanese and then mailed to the editorial department. I'd pay for all the costs and then extra for the trouble. So if there's anyone around that can help, comment on this video or any of my socials in the description so we can work something out. I don't know how things are going to shape up in the future for Berserk. Like I said, the new arc could be amazing, and I really hope it is. But I would rather send feedback as soon as possible on the super unlikely chance that it does matter. I'd rather try than not try. That's all I had to say, though. The journey of Berserk in its new era continues. Let me know how you guys felt. Thank you for watching as always, and until next time, see ya.